On today's Transport Evolved, the Tesla Model S aces another crash test. Toyota says no one wants a plug-in car. And the US DOE tries to find a way of making hydrogen more cheaply. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 217 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, November 9th, 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield, and I'm your usual guest and host, and that's my audio coming back. How embarrassing is that? Normally it doesn't do that. That's my iPad, by the way. It's the show playing live on my iPad. Normally it doesn't do that. I'm really sorry. So where was I? We've got a great show lined up for you today. We've got two fantastic guests. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being so understanding last week when we didn't have a live show. I was ill. I'd just come out of hospital. I'm better now. I'm cybernetic. I'm not going to go into details. But let's move on to our guests. Joining me today for the first time for a live show. He did try in the past. He's never actually been on a live show because we had technical problems in the past. Fantastic gentleman. We met a couple of years ago in Israel, of all places, at a Better Place event. Long time journalist in the green sphere, author, freelance journalist, writes for Mother Nature Network, pluggincars.com, the New York Times, and also is a regular on a little-known thing called Car Talk on NPR. Mr. Jim Motavalli, welcome to the show today. How are you, Jim?
Great to be on, Nikki.
Thank you for joining us after the last time you attempted to join me. It all went very, as we say in the UK, a bit Pete Tong. But we've got you on today for a very special reason, which we'll come to later. But always
don't they also have a saying in England? Went the day badly.
Yes, yeah. We don't use that one anymore. We don't use that one anymore. Also joining me from, by the way, Jim is in Connecticut. At least you were last time I checked. Jim, are you still in Connecticut?
I'm still there, yeah.
Fantastic. Up on the East Coast there. Also joining me from the mass that is North America, although not America itself. He would get very upset if I called him American. Joining me from a little further north, Mr. Matt Stevens from Fleet Karma. How are you today, Matt?
I'm doing great. Now, I'd be very happy if you called me American. I'm a proud Canadian and honorary American.
Proud Canadian or an honorary American. I'm married to an American and I'm half Canadian, so I can claim citizen. I feel that I can claim a cultural heritage to either of those sites, those countries. Put it like that. You know, that's fantastic. So Matt, you are the only person we've had on the show in the past. And now, even now, who's had the pleasure in the past of working on a NASA project, electric vehicles in space. Remind us about that.
Those a couple lunar rovers that the team at Fleet Karma and Cross-Gazen worked on, and the great thing is that whether it's a automobile or a Class 8 tractor or a lunar rover, electric powertrains, and they're all quite similar. So. We took some of the same learnings on those lunar rover projects, and some of the learnings went into a stealth snowmobile, and we use some of the stuff in on-road vehicles too.
Fantastic. I just feel that you have a very fun job, and you just do very fun things all the time. And Jim, you're my jobs. Our jobs are fairly fun a lot of the time, aren't they?
I like being a journalist. I've been one for over 30 years, and I've been a green probably 20 or more of those years, and it's great. I still think it's the most exciting field to be in.
It is.
Even though the journalism profession is rapidly shrinking around my neck.
Yeah, it does.
We all know.
it does strike me that is happening, and I'm kind of looking. I feel like one of those 1980s game of Frogger where you're trying to figure out which thing to jump on next to cross the stream or the road. But being a green journalist, being an automotive journalist, you get to meet some fantastic people and have some fantastic people working with us over the years. And one of the reasons we've got you on the show today is that one of your former colleagues from Car Talk died recently, and sent shockwaves around the world. Tom was sick, and died this week. You worked with him on Car Talk, Jim. Tell us a little bit about Tom.
Well, Ray and Tom sort of became accidental radio hosts. They were both graduates of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and Tom, I think, was the first one to decide that he really didn't want a straight career. He was working in some kind of technical field, and he got into a car accident in his MGA. And I assume everyone in our audience knows what an MGA is, especially in Britain.
Yeah, well, I hope so. One of the finest vehicles there ever was. I'm just going to tell you there, Jim. There's some strange rubbing noises coming from your end, and I think it's probably your microphone.
I was touching the computer. Is it gone now?
It has gone now. So please do carry on with the story of Tom and his MGA.
So he got into a serious car accident with his MGA, and he was thinking, if my life ended now, what would I have to show for it? There's a song by John Hartford. Hopefully some of you, if you don't know it, look it up on YouTube, but it's called In Tall Buildings, and it's about going to work in some skyscraper and doing the whole thing every day and how hard that is to face. So the day he marched into his boss's office and told him he quit. Tom and Ray, Tom was about, I think, 12 years older than Ray. They decided to open up a garage in their fair city of Cambridge, and which became known as the Good News Garage. And the first thing they did was allow people to come in and use their tools and work on their cars themselves. And they told me many hilarious stories about what that was like. Can you imagine what a mess people could make out of their own cars? So eventually it evolved into more of a regular garage. And there was a show on WBUR in Boston, which is in the public relation there, where for some reason they invited mechanics to come down. And I believe Tom was the only one that actually showed up. So they put him on, and he was really just naturally good at radio and funny. And then brought me down also. The chemistry of them was just amazing. It took a while, but eventually they got a national network show, which became Car Talk.
Right.
Became the most popular thing on NPR, which it still basically is. It's an extremely popular show. I think 3.2 million people listen to it every week. What I find in talking to people about it is they will often preface their remarks, I don't care much about cars, but I listen to that show every week, and it's the chemistry of those two. Now, I often found, when I talk to them, they're exactly the same off the mic as they are on the mic. They were the same person, and it was like being on their radio show to just have lunch with them.
Yeah.
And they told stories throughout. They laughed. They finished each other's sentences. They're just hilarious to work with, and the show worked because it was so natural to them. That's just the way they are. And it wasn't a persona they put on. How many times have you read about somebody, they've got some persona they do, and then when the mic's off, they're somebody totally different. I've experienced that myself when I've been on talk shows and just seen them turn it off and turn it on. They were not like that. There's nothing to turn off. That was them. So I think people reacted to the genuineness of the show, as well as maybe and occasionally got some good advice in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And the show basically was, like I said, it was the most popular thing on NPR, and they continued doing it as a regular thing until, as you probably heard, Tom had Alzheimer's, and that eventually got to the point where he couldn't continue to do new shows. And at that point, they started rerunning the programs, and they have ever since. And actually, it was weird because they got actually more popular when it started running in reruns. Maybe because they did some judicious things, came out well. But I've had nothing but good to say about both Tom and Ray, and I'm working with them. It's been about 5 or 6 years now, and the whole team at Car Talk has just been great to me, and they encouraged me to write about green cars, and I would say both Tom and Ray were very green, and Ray still is very green, very interested in environmental stuff and electric cars. So they've always been encouraging me to write about that and pick up some strange angle, as well as be funny sometimes.
Yeah.
As much as I can. Not as funny as them.
Well, I must say, I was believe it or not, I was driving a Tesla Model S on loan recently, and we were trying out the satellite radio, and we turned on one of the national, well, one of the local radio stations in Portland, one of the NPR stations in Portland, Oregon, and believe it or not, a Car Talk episode came on in which they were talking about the Tesla, and I just thought, wow, that was kind of, so that's the last time I listened. I did listen to this week's show as well, because they've got kind of a best of Tom episode, which is really worth listening to. So thank you very much for giving that very touching.
I wrote a tribute to Tom, which you could find at Mother Nature Network or MNN.com.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It's got some of his prize lines in it.
Fantastic. We'll go there and read, and it's linked from your website as well, I think, Jim,
yes,
if I remember correctly. Matt, you have been busy at My Karma, recently, or Cross Chasm, which is My Karma, My Fleet Karma, and something else, isn't it? My EV, My EV, perhaps. Now, you first came on the show back earlier this year when you were running an Indiegogo campaign as the CEO of Cross Chasm, and you were looking to raise funds for a project that allowed plug-in car owners to kind of not only be very good about collecting their data, but also sharing information with one another about how their cars are doing, collect data about battery degradation, collect information about charging and how much they charged and how much energy they used, but also a really neat sort of add-on feature that allows people to communicate with one another at charging stations using a 2D printed barcode, which enables you to say, hey, I need to charge, can I unplug your car and plug mine in for the 5 minutes because I need an emergency charge, etc., etc. And it's all anonymous, which is fantastic. And disclaimer here, I backed your project to the tune of 2 cars, because I've got 2 cars.
I was gonna say twice, I thought.
Twice, yeah. So I'm very excited about that project, and I'm very keen to see the final product when it emerges from its production run. So how are things? Because I know a lot of our viewers and listeners to this show also backed the My EV project on Indiegogo.
Sure, yeah. So, and sorry, please let me know if I'm breaking up. You're breaking up a little bit there. But yeah, so My EV, what we learned really quickly is that EV owners like myself, we are very data hungry. And the data we're getting off the dash or some of the manufacturer apps wasn't really cutting it. And we also learned really quickly that we're a pretty social bunch. So My EV was taking our fleet tech part of Fleet Karma and making a smaller, lower cost Bluetooth device that could do a lot of the same stuff, but for individual EV owners. So put this little device into your plug-in vehicle, it connects over Bluetooth to your smartphone, and then with that, you can then see a bunch of data that is hard to otherwise get, and you can share it with others, and you can post it to Facebook. And when you hit your 50-mile volt day, you can you can share it with your closest friends, and then.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to that. I get 50 miles out of our vault on a good day, but right now that's not happening.
I have never hit the 50-mile threshold, so if
well, that's
if I
because
do,
you're in
you will see
Canada.
it.
So
Yeah,
you need to be looking for, 80 kilometers?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I have a 2012, and I can get really close. I can get like the 49. I've never crossed that 50 threshold.
So the project, last time, I think the last update we had was that it was coming through testing. It's just about to enter production. Is that correct?
So the hardware's all done. So the hardware we received, we've been playing with the release candidate apps for. I have been playing with it for about 3 weeks now. And your title of the show, a matter of quality, is very apropos, because there was a few things that I personally didn't love the experience, and so we're getting really close, because we're now at release candidate 3, and it's becoming quite usable. So I'm enjoying it.
Cool. And the other side of Fleet Karma, you do the analytics. You were the guys who did the analytics in winter of really cold weather use for electric vehicles. So you analysed huge amounts of data from fleets regarding battery degradation in the winter and use in really cold weather. And we are talking Ontario winters, aren't we?
Well, we're talking colder than Ontario winters. We're talking northern Quebec winters.
Oh, wow.
And the like. So, yeah, no, we dated down to minus 45.
Wow. And how these cars performed and how the batteries responded. And that there is still that data on your website, isn't there? So people can go and look at that as and when they want to see it.
It's funny, we see a surge. We can almost correlate the traffic on that page to ambient temperature in the local region.
There you go. There's a very interesting article there waiting to be written, I think. Jim, we're going to come back and talk to you now about. There was an election this week, wasn't there, in the United States? And
there was indeed.
And it was very interesting. Some might say depressing. I'm not going to sit on any political persuasions, but everyone knows I'm a stinking liberal. That the United States Senate turned a different colour, and the House turned a different colour, and we've now got
the House was
the House.
Already...
Sorry, was already a different colour. The Senate turned a different colour, so they've now controlled the Republicans. Now control the House and the Senate, and there's some very interesting things going on. Now there were some good things. Oregon had some interesting laws changed. Which, those Oregonians that I've spoken to have gone, well, it doesn't actually change anything that's happening in Oregon. It just now makes the things that weren't illegal now legal. So, whatever. But interestingly, we are now facing a challenge, really, because Senator Ted Cruz and James Inhofe are now heading to be on various committees in the US Senate. The Science Committee and the Environment and Public Works actively. Both of these gentlemen are climate change deniers. Both of these gentlemen do not see the point in renewable energy or green vehicles or future car technology. Should we be worried?
Let me just stop you there. It's definitely true that both of them are climate deniers, but I think it's equally true that until very recently, electric vehicles and alternative energy was not a partisan issue, that it was embraced by Republicans.
Yes.
You can go back. You can go back as recently as the Bush presidency, and not only was he a huge supporter of hydrogen vehicles, but he also put into place the electric vehicle loan program that basically jump-started Tesla. And it's funny because since then I've seen like Republican attacks on that as giveaways to these companies, but it was wholly a Bush program, inaugurated in 2008 before Obama was elected. So calling it a liberal program is a bit laughable, really.
Right.
And I think certainly if you look at electric vehicles or any form of alternate vehicle as a way of ending foreign oil domination. And this is a particular, this resonates with people across the spectrum. You can say electric vehicles run on homegrown energy from the grid, or compressed natural gas cars run off of domestically produced energy, something like that.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true of that. We're not tapping into from Saudi Arabia or Libya to run electric cars, unless for some reason the oil and the power plants came from there. I think is not usually the case. But I think we've seen a sort of backstep in that particular area where you have essentially what I think looks to me like some Republicans saying anything the Democrats are for, we're against.
Right.
So I think they've looked at some things like electric cars or hydrogen subsidies or support for solar or wind projects. They looked at those and said, well, Democrats like them, so we don't. And I think that's evidence of the extreme partisanship in Washington now. It's why they can't get anything done. Laughably, in the couple days after the election, there was brave talk about Democrats and Republicans working together on issues of common interest. But they always say that, and it always falls apart. At least in recent memory, it has. I'm not very optimistic. I think we're going to see a lot of gridlock. We're going to see a lot of Republican bills passed and vetoed by President Obama. I think that goes without saying. We're going to see a lot of that. So it's unclear to me why the election went exactly the way it did, but the clearest message coming from the people is they're dissatisfied with Obama, and they're really dissatisfied with Congress, way more than Obama.
Right.
They have a approval rating of Congress that's in like the under 20% area.
Yeah, the do nothing Congress.
Right.
They're
so
worse
in
than
a lot
the
of
do
cases,
nothing Congress.
a lot of cases, what happened is they just kicked out incumbents, regardless of who they were. And it happened that this year the Democratic incumbents. So, but it is also true that the party in power always loses support in mid-year elections, off-year non-presidential elections. So the outcome was not that unusual.
So to kind of to recap, do you think that some of these potential appointments are going to cause problems for policy, or you just feel that they're not going to get past the president, so we don't need to worry about them? With in offer.
Obama's because of his inability, he couldn't get anything through Congress before the election, so it doesn't really change anything that way. If one house of Congress is going to stop any initiative, that's enough not to get passed. If they have both houses of Congress, it's like putting an extra nail in a coffin that's already nailed down.
Yeah.
It's not none of his bills are going to be made into law because they won't get through Congress. He therefore has the ability to govern by executive action. It looks like he's going to do something on immigration in that area. But almost everything he's done, including what he did for the so-called CAFE standards, which are corporate average fuel economy, which is requiring automakers to reach 54.5 miles per gallon by all that policy was around Congress without using his authority under the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and all that. So basically, he's been able to use some of the powers of the office to get some environmentally positive things done. So we can at least thank. I mean, the downside of it is that this can also happen.
Oh, we've now lost Jim because he moved to answer his phone and then or to shut his phone up. Are you back, Jim? Nope, he's knocked his cable out, I think. I'm just gonna keep talking because that was really interesting. We got to that point. I think you're back, Jim.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Keep talking.
Okay. All right. I think that a Republican president will be able to use these executive powers the same way, but most of what he's been able to do in the last few years, including enforcing really tough standards on existing power plants, particularly coal plants. Again, that was an end run around Congress, because Congress would never have approved that. I'm sorry about my phone. I'm gonna have to turn it off.
That's all right. It's somebody telling you you're on the radio.
Yeah.
So that I think I'm going to be watching this with particular interest, obviously, as I'm moving forward, looking to move to the States. And interestingly, talking to I was at the EPA, and I was at a conference between the EPA and the Department of Energy. Sorry, the Department of Transport and the Department of Energy. I do apologise. Back in January this year. And I was a guest of Washington. And while I was in DC, while I was talking with people who work both in the academic spheres and also the legislative, the executive branches, they were all very kind of keen to move forward to change things, but they were also very mindful of gridlock and how the different branches of government work, and also how the different levels within those branches work. And sometimes there is very much a sense of what's going on at the ground floor, at the rock face, doesn't always make its way up, or vice versa. Someone can say one thing, but it ends up something else happening.
Well, let me make another point, Nikki, which is that right now, in terms of electric vehicles, I'm not sure there's a need for any new legislation. What we have in place is fairly good. We have a $7,500 federal income tax credit for people who buy electric vehicles. And a lot of the other things that needed to be done have been done by states on the state level. And I'm not aware of any important legislation that was proposed for electric vehicles that didn't get passed. There's not anything like that pending. I don't think there's a huge consensus that electric vehicles need more subsidies.
Oh, no, not at all. No.
So the congressional gridlock probably hasn't affected EVs as much as in other places. I know we're going to talk about Norway later, but we can look at what really strong, great subsidies can do to jumpstart the EV market in as unlikely a place as Norway, where I don't know if it gets to negative 45 degrees, but it's certainly, I'm surprised that EVs work at all.
Yeah, it does. 45 all right, well, let's move on, actually, talking about that, because Matt, for those who don't know, Matt is has a doctorate in chemistry. And is it electrochemistry, Matt, or is it just chemistry?
Chemical engineering, but focused on electrochemistry.
Okay.
You're bang on.
So you did a fantastic 2-minute video on YouTube, which I've linked to, explaining how and why electric car batteries degrade. And I'm going to set you the challenge now of trying to run us down that in a fairly short order, just so that because people are always asking, oh, why does my car's battery degrade? Wrong? Do I need to worry? There's also, obviously, if you're a Leaf owner and you've got the 12 segments on your display and you lose the first one and you panic. I've lost the first one and I still haven't lost my second one yet. And in fact, I've nearly travelled as far. Well, no, I haven't, but I've travelled a long way without losing my second bar, and I thought I would have lost it by now. So run us through, for those who are listening and watching at home, how batteries degrade and why they degrade.
Sure. Okay. So I'll just try the 90-second summary. So in grad school, I was a kid in a candy store. My job was to beat up lithium-ion batteries and fuel cells and see how quickly and how successfully I can do it. And the good news about lithium-ion batteries, or easier for explaining, is that while there's a lot of degradation mechanisms, there's one mechanism that covers the vast majority of battery degradation. And it's what's called SEI layer growth. So SEI stands for solid electrolyte interface. And it's basically that layer growing. So here's a quick 90-second summary. In a lithium-ion battery, there's basically two sides. There's two electrodes. There's the anode and the cathode. And there's a lot of different chemistries for the cathode, but almost all of the anodes that are in lithium-ion batteries are some carbon graphite structure. And generally, it's a bunch of little graphite spheres. And what happens is the solid electrolyte interface is a layer that coats that graphite sphere and with a material, and that material is a lot of things in it, but it includes some of the lithium from the cell in there. And so what happens is, as the battery ages and as you charge and discharge and cool, that layer that surrounds the sphere cracks, breaks, and grows. And so as that layer grows, you get a double punch for degradation. The first is that for lithium, when you're charging, it has to go through that layer into the sphere. And so the thicker that layer is, the harder it is for lithium to get through. And so how that shows up is when you're pulling power out of the battery, you get a lower voltage. So you get less when you pull power from it. And then when you try and charge it, it actually goes to a higher voltage. So you have to work hard to get the lithium in there. And that's called power fade. Power fade. The second punch, sorry, yeah?
Yeah, keep going.
So the second punch is capacity fade, which is what is in that layer is some lithium. And lithium is what you're actually using as it's your currency of the cell. So as you get lithium locked in that layer, it can no longer do its job. So that gets you less amp hours. And so that's called capacity fade. And so when you combine power fade and capacity fade, you get the degradation of the battery. And all it really goes down to in most cases is just that little layer around these tiny little graphite spheres growing over time.
Wow. There you go. That was brilliant, wasn't it, Jim? That was just...
I learned something I didn't know.
Yeah, there you go. So people talking about, one battery chemistry being better than another, one car being better than another. And it really is down to, microscopic changes, isn't it, in the battery? I mean, we're talking microscopic. Are we talking atomic level?
Close to that, yeah.
Yeah, close
You're
to
talking
atomic
tiny spheres. Like you'd need a scanning electron microscope to go down and see these little tiny spheres.
That is wow. That is so cool. I've got to find a video of that one day and watch it because I'm a real total geek. All right, moving on to our final story of the segment. Craig Scott, not to be confused with Paul Scott, obviously. Craig Scott, who is Toyota's US Manager of Advanced Technologies, made a bit of a stir towards the end of 2 weeks ago and start of last week, in which he was interviewed in an LA Times article in which he cited that no one wanted Toyota to make plug-in cars. Essentially, we'd make them if people wanted us to. No one's asking us to make them. That was a paraphrase, by the way, of what he said. And it was kind of a justification for Toyota's focus on hydrogen fuel cell cars. Now, Scott has made a little bit of a wave amongst electric vehicle fans, and even towards the end of last week, there was even a petition that came online on one of the petition sites, calling on Toyota to actually continue making plug-in cars. Now, personally, I feel that the plug-in world is wasting its time with Toyota, and frankly, I think we just need to forget Toyota as a plug-in vehicle manufacturer and accept that it's going to work. There's my phone. There's just two of us now, that we just have to accept. This has never happened before. That we have to accept that. Sorry about that. That we have to accept that Toyota is a hydrogen fuel cell manufacturer, and frankly, I think that's fine, accepting that fact. But should we be forcing Toyota to continue making plug-in cars? Is this petition pointless, Jim?
Well, keep in mind, Toyota has made two plug-in cars, the RAV4 EV and the Scion IQ EV, though I've never actually seen the latter one. It's the most stealth car ever built.
Yeah, it's
I've
only available.
Never seen one.
It's only available on car share programs, isn't it?
Yes. And I was once invited to a program for the Scion IQ that I think that they canceled because they decided they had actually thought of a fairly ambitious program for it and then decided to scale it way back, and it was never held. But this attitude on the part of Toyota is absolutely nothing new. I think about 4 years ago, I did a New York Times piece that made some headlines in which I reported their exact same view on this. It is a corporate policy of Toyota to be pretty negative about electric cars. That view has prevailed at the company for at least 4 or 5 years. And I think this is not just some rogue person going off on this. He's effectively carefully enunciating the company's policy on EVs. They've always been stronger on hydrogen fuel cell cars, and next year they are going to be unveiling their fuel cell car. That said, I don't quite understand that focus in the sense that you can use electric cars anywhere in the country. Fuel cell cars, though, I think they have wonderful promise. I just drove the Hyundai version of the Tucson that I think is really exciting and everything. The cars are great. There's just nowhere to refuel them.
Right.
In the U.S., in England, anywhere. There's a little bit of infrastructure in Germany. There's a little bit in Japan. And Los Angeles has a pretty determined hydrogen infrastructure with maybe 9 stations right now. But I don't see how you can advance as a reasonable alternative to electric vehicles a technology that right now can only reasonably be introduced in one city in America. So the cars are fine. All the companies have done a great job of engineering them. The cost of fuel cells comes down dramatically. The size of the cells keeps shrinking. What they can do with them, the range of the cars, all that great. The cars are as quiet as an electric car to drive. Essentially, they are electric cars. The difference is that in my town of Fairfield here, we just put in a new EV charging station at our library, and that cost about $10,000. To put in a hydrogen station would be $1 to $2 million.
Right.
So there's a huge difference in the cost of the refueling infrastructure. And we have 150,000 gas stations approximately in the U.S. You have to somehow think of an infrastructure that duplicates that. And I think we are capable of doing that for electric vehicles. It's hard to imagine. What is 160,000 times a million? I can't count that high. But that's the number you'd need to replicate our gas infrastructure with hydrogen.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? And we're going to come to that in a story later on today in the show. Matt, what's your opinion? Do you think that people should be essentially holding, putting out petitions calling Toyota to make plug-ins? Part of me thinks this is kind of sad. This is how things were 10 years ago. But now the difference is 10 years ago, Toyota was one of the few automakers who had produced an electric vehicle that was worthwhile, and the petition was to save the cars and to keep making them. But these days we've got competition from Nissan, we've got Tesla, we've got BMW, and we've got GM, all of whom are serious about electric cars. I think GM's motivation is different to Nissan, BMW, and Tesla, but still, you can still buy these cars. Toyota seems an outlier. It just feels like we're wasting our time. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't really see the point of petitioning Toyota to change their product plans and their product views. I think they'll win or fail in the market, and people will buy their vehicles. So if people truly see the strong utility, and for them, a fuel cell vehicle makes a lot of sense, they'll buy it.
Yeah. And
if people instead want to go the plug-in route, and Toyota doesn't have a strong portfolio in that space, then they won't buy Toyota. So. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think the petition to keep the Gen 1 RAV4 EVs on the road it's a different thing. I think Toyota's trying to see where they see the market going and where they think they can play in it, and they've made a decision to focus on the hydrogen side, and they may be right, they may be wrong, they may be part right, but I think it's their choice to pick that path, and then it's our choice as car buyers to decide if they put a product that appeals to us or not, and they'll win or lose in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, it's time for an ad break, so stay right where you are, and we will be right back. Do you enjoy the show? Do you like wearing fun and unique clothes that support the things you love? Then you're going to want to head over to www.transportevolved.com/shop, where you can show your support of Transport Evolved by buying one of our fabulous Transport Evolved branded apparel. We've got everything from hoodies and t-shirts to water bottles, badges and tote bags, and they'll be sent direct from our partners at Spreadshirt to your home in double quick time. And what's more, by buying something from our shop, you'll be sending us a little kickback as a thanks for our hard work on the show. You get something unique and fun, and we get a warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that we can continue to bring you a great show every week. What's not to love? And we thank you, as always, for your kind support of the show. On to part 2 of the show, we've got the fantastic Jim Motavalli with us and also Matt Stevens. Jim, obviously, well-known green journalist and author, and Matt is the CEO of Cross Chasm, the people who are doing cool things with data and electric vehicles. Let's move on to part 2. I'm aware our show's running. I think our show's going to run long today, and I hope that's okay with everybody. We're having lots of great discussion. Let's talk about Tesla. This week, Tesla Motors held its official Q3 earnings call for 2014. I'm not going to go through the details here. Depending on whether you look at the GAAP or the non-GAAP accounting, depends on whether Tesla made a loss or made a profit. We don't really need to go into that too much. But alongside that, it had some fairly positive news. So production was up. Tesla CEO Elon Musk was very buoyant about the future. He did talk about making sure that things were of high quality, and sort of tying in with that, the Tesla Model S was awarded a 5-star Euro NCAP crash test rating this week in the UK or in Europe. We can see some of this footage there now. The Model S did very well. Interestingly, Tesla took away from that, we've had a 5-star rating, just like we have in the US. There were some interesting things to note about the European crash test. Most noticeably, there was a problem with the passenger airbag, which bottomed out, but Tesla apparently has fixed that on production model cars now. But also, alongside that huge amount of news, came the news that the Model X is going to be delayed. The Tesla Model X, which was first debuted, Jim, back in 2012, wasn't it? We first saw the Model X unveiled.
That sounds about right.
And it's now been pushed back. It was originally pushed back to the end of 2012, sort of 2013. Then it was pushed back to 2014. Then 2015, and now we're seeing Q3 2015. So it was March. Now it's been pushed back to Q3. It seems to be, although Musk hasn't said recently. In the past, he said he kind of admitted it was those Falcon wing doors that was causing the problems. He hasn't said that recently, as far as I'm aware, Jim. But these Falcon wing doors seem to be causing Tesla a lot of headaches.
Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing that has delayed the Model X. I don't think it matters a huge amount. What really matters is when they do come out with it, it doesn't have major problems. I think if you compare it, say, to the Fisker Karma, that car was rolled out before it was ready because they faced similar pressure. They had also had a bunch of delays, and they finally said, all right, we're going to just sort of roll the dice here. We're going to bring it out, and hopefully it'll work out okay. It didn't. There were a lot of problems still left on that car. I think Elon Musk is correct to not want to put the car out until it's ready. I think in many ways it only heightens anticipation for it. And to just try to meet a deadline with a product that isn't ready would not be a smart move.
And it's a very Silicon Valley thing, isn't it? It's a very Silicon Valley thing as opposed to your standard automotive industry operation.
Well, it's funny you point that out, because if you take a look at the partnership between Apple and the automaker putting this CarPlay system in all the cars, Apple is used to having a lot of delays, and car makers aren't used to that. The suppliers try to meet the deadline, so the 2013 car has what they said was going to be on it. In this case, automakers had to roll out cars like the Hyundai Sonata, Apple CarPlay, and that was really upsetting to them.
Yeah. And I think the challenge, facing people like Tesla is not to be like the rest of the automotive industry, right? That's what Tesla prides itself on, being different.
Yes, and in many ways, I think they have been different. In many ways, they have shaken up the car industry in mostly good ways. I'm not surprised that they've had delays with the Model X, because with the Falcon wing doors and other things, they're really trying to do some fairly revolutionary things. They're not experienced car makers, so they're probably making some mistakes that, say, General Motors wouldn't make, but I think they're going to get it right. I think they're going to come out with a good car. And, with a perfectionist like Musk in charge, I don't think they're going to put it out, their fingers crossed.
And that would be a PR nightmare for Tesla from an engineering
way
point of view.
worse, a way worse PR nightmare than having to deal with delaying it 3 times.
Yeah, absolutely. And the shares, Tesla's share prices haven't rocketed or fallen as a consequence of this. They're just carrying on, business as usual.
Right. What did it debut at, like 17, and it's over $200 a share now. So I think you would have made a lot of money buying that stuff.
Well, both Daimler and Toyota obviously have now dumped their shares. So
at a very big profit.
Yeah, that would keep me happy for a long time.
Daimler made, as I recall, Daimler made $750 million on that stock.
Yeah, I thought it was 780, but you might be right there. So, a lot of money either way. And Matt, this is something as a CEO you can understand yourself. You don't want to put out a product until it's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least where you have a really good user experience, and then you have enough of a framework where you can OTA the extra features that people want. So, like we just had to do that with my EV. We had to make a call 2 weeks ago of whether or not we were ready to ship. Yep. And I definitely appreciate the challenges and trying to meet an aggressive deadline. But at the end of the day, if you roll things out early, it's a bigger headache for everyone.
Yes.
And so I can appreciate the call that's made, and seeing the number of drive unit replacements that they had to do on the Model S. I think I think Tesla may be being a little extra cautious on the rollout of the Model X to try and reduce some costly repair bills.
Mm-hmm. And I've got to say, if I'm advising someone about Model X, I'm going to do what I do with any car, and I'm going to say wait a year before you buy, because any new car from a maker is going to have problems in that first year of production. The Leaf did, the Volt did, the Model S did, and I think there are inevitably going to be problems with those doors, but I've got to say power to Elon Musk and the Tesla board for doing the right thing there. All right, moving on. The US Department of Energy has just launched something called the $1 million H2 Refuel H prize, Jim. First of all, that's a very small prize fund as far as money goes from the DOE. I mean, how much money has the DOE invested in hydrogen fuel cell technology to point?
Well, there's a great history of this. Under the previous DOE administration, they were under siege from the hydrogen community for cutting funding for hydrogen. And partly as a result of that pressure, they restored most of the funding. And they seem way more bullish on hydrogen these days. And traditionally, it's been fairly well funded by the DOE.
Right.
So they're going back to where they were.
And NREL NREL has done a lot of work on hydrogen refueling technologies. But this is a very interesting one. This is a $1 million H2 Refuel H prize, and the prize fund is specifically to develop ways of refueling and producing hydrogen fuel at home or in office environments, basically small scale. Because as you were saying earlier on, hydrogen infrastructure is darned expensive. There are two challenges facing hydrogen at the moment. And the first one is the cost of the infrastructure. And the second is the environmental footprint, the energy footprint of generating this hydrogen in the first place. Now, unfortunately, we had to write an opinion piece this week detailing why we at Transport Evolved cover hydrogen fuel cell technology, because I know a lot of our listeners and a lot of our viewers and a lot of our readers don't feel that we should be even giving hydrogen fuel cells the time of day. But I think it would be short-sighted of us not to accept that things may change in the future, and we need to have at least a balanced representation of it and be honest about the challenges, just like we are with any other fuel sort. But this is an interesting one. The prize fund is specifically either for electrolyzed hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from water, which of course has to be distilled water as far as I'm aware, from a chemical point of view, has to be pure, or from natural gas, so reformed natural gas. Now, both of those processes Matt. I'm not the chemist, but both of those processes seem to be unsuitable for small-scale domestic cities, right?
No, well, again, a little outside of my expertise, but back I did do a bit of work on electrolyzers, and you can get some pretty small scale electrolyzers that can run locally. But when you're doing that, then you basically really are running it as a pure electric vehicle. You're just storing the energy in hydrogen rather than storing it in a lithium chemistry. But you can definitely go down to size at smaller scales. I've read a few articles of smaller steam methane reforming smaller plants that could be more residential. But in general, while the electrolysis is more friendly to smaller setups, the methane reforming is a much harder thing to do at very small scale, at least economically.
So
can I just make a point about this? Here
Sure.
in Connecticut, a company attempted to market a electrolyzer for home use, and they were unsuccessful with that. The price would have been way high. I don't know, 20,000, something like that. And is far preferable to make hydrogen from natural gas because natural gas is so cheap. Almost all the natural gas, or almost all the hydrogen in use in the U.S. today is from natural gas. And the price has gotten to the point where it's maybe the equivalent of $10 a gallon. And the hydrogen people would tell you that's the equivalent of $5 a gallon because of the greater energy content of hydrogen as opposed to gasoline. Whether that's accurate or not, I'm not quite sure. But getting down to $5 a gallon is getting there. You know, it's a lot cheaper than it was, and it's all because of low-cost natural gas through fracking. The environmentalists don't like to hear you say anything good about fracking, but it's why we have low-cost natural gas today.
It's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, I was reading something earlier on today about fracking. I'm personally not a fan of fracking, but then I'm just, I just wish that we, as a society, we just put our heads together. I mean, I was watching the news today in the UK, and they were talking about petrol prices falling in the UK, gas prices falling in the UK for cars, and going to a point where it would be, you know, £150 is what we're currently, well, we're paying 140, but under £1 in the future potentially if prices continue to drop. And I'm just thinking that's not really going to be very helpful, because it's just making something that's scarce and getting scarcer cheaper, so we use it up more quickly. That's my
Well,
take on it.
if I was a oil industry executive, I would want to make oil as cheap as possible right now, because you would want to slow. One thing people get really angry about high sustained fuel prices, and another is it really slows the electric vehicle revolution. There was some concern on the part of Tesla, for instance, that their orders were slowing down. And on that analyst call that you cited earlier, Elon Musk really tried to damper that one down by saying that looking at what they might have produced in 1 month as opposed to another month is really misleading. It's why they don't actually give out figures how much they produced in a month, because it has everything to do with whether they got supplies of parts. His basic point is that their demand has not slackened, just sometimes the number of cars they can produce.
Yeah.
Because some ship from Hong Kong was late. Has nothing to do with anything related to demand. But some people were saying that low oil prices is why there was a reduction in demand for Tesla cars.
I don't buy that. It'd be interesting to see.
I don't think so, really.
All right.
Either.
So next story, the EPA. Fun task the EPA has of essentially officially approving fuel economy labels for all new vehicles sold in the US, whether they are powered by electricity, whether they are powered by gasoline, diesel, compressed natural gas, hydrogen. And I think a lot of people think that the EPA actually physically tests all of the new vehicles that come to market and then they release their fuel economy figures. That's not actually how it works. The EPA has a set of rules, kind of a test criteria that the automakers follow in their own laboratories very often. They then send those figures to the EPA for verification. But the EPA kind of just looks at them very often, looks at the data, kind of goes, yeah, that's fine, and puts it up on their website. Now, of late, there's been quite, what's it, an ongoing problem, isn't it, Jim? It's been going on for years, actually, of automakers twisting their figures slightly and claiming their cars can do better gas mileage than they can. We're all familiar with the court case with the woman with her Honda Civic Hybrid who took Honda to court because her Honda Hybrid didn't do the miles per gallon that it said in the adverts. Ford has been wrapped over the knuckles of late for its Ford Fusion and its energy plug-in hybrid as well. And it's now Kia and Hyundai have been hit with a $300 million fine for misstating their fuel economy labels. Now, Jim, maybe you can put this into context for me. Kia and Hyundai, obviously, they're South Korean automakers. They're used to I'm presuming they're used to a different fuel economy testing. Is this just an error on their part? Do you think they were really trying to deceive the EPA and car buyers? I mean, was there any malice in this, or is this just a symptom of effectively a fairly old-fashioned way of trying to figure out a vehicle's economy?
It's interesting to point out that one of the aspects of the settlement was that they will now have to actually do the testing in the U.S. as opposed to Korea.
Right.
So that sounds like they're making a judgment on how they do the testing in Korea. And it's certainly, I'm not going to say there was intent to deceive on their part, but I do note that all of these cases, the error is always on the side of giving the cars more fuel economy rather than less. So I think one thing it highlights is the fact that fuel economy is a really important seller of cars these days. If you go back 10 years, it wouldn't really matter what the EPA sticker was. Buyers didn't care about fuel economy. Once gasoline hit $4 a gallon in the U.S., people started caring about it a lot. So it was in the top 5 of what sold cars. So for a company like Hyundai with a Sonata, they wanted to be able to say it got 40 miles per gallon on the highway. That can be a really big selling point. Whether, depending on what class car it is, to be able to say it gets 30 miles per gallon on the highway or 40, and it's a lot better number than 39 or 29. So I think there's a pretty good temptation to want to, push it up a little bit. And maybe if they thought it wasn't really closely following the numbers, they might have tweaked it a little bit. I'm not saying that Hyundai, Kia did this or Ford did this, but in both cases they were found to overestimate the actual fuel economy of the car, and they were made to use numbers. In Hyundai's case, I think it was like 1 to 6 miles per gallon differences.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know anything really about the South Korean test cycle, but I do know that the Japanese test cycle, the JCO8 test cycle, is ludicrously optimistic. I mean, on the Japanese JCO8 test cycle, for example, the Nissan Leaf, the current generation Nissan Leaf has an approved range of over 200 kilometers per charge, which is 160 miles. In Europe, the same car is rated at 100, I think it's 128. And the same car in the US is rated at 84, isn't it? 83, 84. So it's insane. The other thing to bear in mind, and here's a question for you both. Can you tell me, in the UK, which automaker in the UK, which car that is sold in the UK is most accurate in terms of its fuel economy ratings? Which vehicle sold today, which brand sells cars that are most likely to be on the nose, the fuel economy that their ratings say?
How about Morgan?
Nope. Matt, do you want to guess?
Porsche.
It's actually Jaguar Land Rover.
Okay.
Jaguar Land Rover. Now, that might be because their cars often have big gas-guzzling V8s in them. But their cars apparently tend to be on the nose in terms of fuel economy. you can actually get a Jaguar Land Rover vehicle, whether it be a Range Rover or a Land Rover Defender or a Jaguar of some description. You can actually get the fuel economy that the label says you're supposed to be able to get, which I always find.
Hasn't that company, they said recently that they're looking at producing electric cars?
Yes, yeah. They're looking to produce. I think the rumor is one of the rumors is a Range Rover electric. I've driven their Land Rover Defender electric prototype, and I want one just because I grew up on a farm, and the Defender is one of my favourite vehicles. But I would never own a petrol or a diesel one, but I'd own an electric one. So, Matt, you obviously spend a large part of your career these days looking at fuel economy and trying to take these EPA ratings and try and shoehorn them into more realistic figures. What's your take on all of this and the fines and et cetera, et cetera? Is it really just impossible to get those figures correct?
Well, yeah. So as you said, like, this is an area incredibly near and dear to my heart. First off, when we talk about the American cycles and the 5 cycles, people think it's like 5 simple tests and you take the average of the 5, but it's actually more complicated than that. So first off, you have to go through these coast down procedures to get parameters that you use to set up your test facility. And that's where there was one of the biggest gaps. And so EPA has said for next year, they're going to have a much clearer definition on how you set up the coast down to get these parameters. And that was a huge point of contention that was causing a lot of error. So that'll be better in general. The other thing is in the 5 cycle, like, to actually get the label numbers, you take a little bit of this SCO3 cycle and you subtract this little bit of the EPA cycle to figure out how much air conditioner loads matter. And it's this really complex and convoluted method that's a best attempt at trying to come up with a realistic number, but with really specific constraints. And so, as you know, like, we spend a lot of our time saying, well, let's throw out the standardized test cycles and let's build a number, an estimate for a vehicle based on how that individual drives. So rather than saying this is the average of what the average American population, if everyone drove this vehicle, would get, instead saying, this is what Jim will get on this vehicle based on how Jim drives. So this is what Nikki will get on those same vehicles because Nikki drives different than Jim. So I think sort of my view going forward is that as we ramp up the CAFE curve that Jim talked about, getting to 54.5 miles a gallon, this is going to become more and more of an issue because there's more and more technologies that are going to be rolled out that these generalized test cycles are going to have a harder time. They'll be less accurate as you try and correlate them to real world options. So I guess my short 2-point conclusion after a long description would be, one is some of the loopholes in the test or some of the areas where there was a lot of ambiguity in the test protocol is being fixed, which is good news. So that's the good side. The bad side is as we ramp up more technologies, I actually think we're going to have a lot more of this come to the foreground because plug-in hybrids are sensitive in different ways than a diesel vehicle is. And so as we see those becoming a bigger part of it, I think there's a lot more issues to come.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And obviously, of course, fuel economy ratings are always tougher for plug-in cars and vehicles with shorter range because the shorter the range, the more important those figures are. And I know that that's something that a lot of plug-in owners get very frustrated about. They go, well, my car can only do X, Y, and Z. And I say, well, that's one of the reasons why when I'm test driving cars, I happen to have a Nissan ENV200 this week, the minivan, on loan. And one of the things I'm going to try and do is just to see what a real world average drive is going to be. Nissan's giving, I think, 80, 90, maybe even 100 miles of range. And I think a realistic range for that vehicle is probably nearly 60 or maybe 70. So it'd be interesting to see. And of course, everyone's different. Everyone drives differently. Final story of the segment. Continental, European company, probably better known to your average car owner and driver as a tyre company. But this week, it also happens to be the second largest tier 1 parts supplier in Europe. So they supply parts directly to automakers who put those parts in their cars. And back in 2012, Continental got together with a South Korean company called SK Innovation to work on a battery project to develop, design, and build and distribute electric car battery packs. This week, however, there's news from Continental that's saying by the end of the year it will make a decision on whether it's essentially just going to write that project off. It was supposed to be a 5-year project, several million, Jim, but it's now talking about potentially canning this project because people aren't buying electric cars as quickly. Now, I think the underlying logic really has got nothing to do whether people are buying electric cars or plug-in cars, but moreover that Continental, the company, can't see a profit in this technology, and it also cannot see itself competing with the likes of Tesla, Panasonic, LG Chem, Samsung SDI. These are all companies who are already very well established in the plug-in vehicle world as suppliers and manufacturers of battery packs. Obviously, Tesla is the exception, but it's working with Panasonic, who obviously currently is its battery supplier. What do we think, Jim?
I think they're probably right about that. They're not being able to compete with Tesla for a number of reasons. I think that actual technology that will be usable and manufacturable on a mass scale is not going to improve a whole lot by the time they get that factory going. I heard J.B. Straubel of Tesla talking about this recently, and I had actually done a story saying, suppose there's some breakthrough technology in perhaps solid-state batteries that will revolutionize the cost and the way we make lithium-ion batteries. Wouldn't that make the whole gigafactory thing sort of obsolete before it even starts? Yeah. And Straubel's point of view, and I've talked to Panasonic, who is Tesla's partner on this, their point of view is there isn't going to be technology that's going to make essentially what we do now obsolete in any near term. And I think they sell also, there's a huge amount of claims made by battery makers that they're going to have the cost of the cells and double the output and all this kind of things. And it's easy to have that in a PowerPoint. It's harder to have it in a working cell. And Elon Musk said, just send us the cells. Don't send us the PowerPoint. He's right about that. And if the Gigafactory is going to achieve cost reductions by the economies of scale, simply because they're going to be bigger factory than anyone else has, then it may be hard to compete with them in terms of price and quality and all that. So that you could be right. That's why they've decided that this isn't a good area for them.
And also, we're at a point where Tesla's modus operandi for the Gigafactory is not we will own and operate the Gigafactory. It's we're going to build this big facility, and then we're going to invite all of our best buddies to come and work on site specifically for us. So they'll be producing batteries for us using their technology, their proprietary methods in our building, which I think is just a very clever stroke, because instead of Tesla having to start from the beginning and poach people or whatever, it's actually bringing in its partner companies and gone, okay, we've designed this place where we can all work under one roof. It's very clever. I quite like that. Matt, I presume that you're of a similar opinion. It's very difficult to be to start in an industry like lithium-ion battery technology if you haven't already been in this point.
Yeah. Unless you have some game-changing technology that I don't have any idea what that would be. So this looks to me just like a strategic call that they can't lead, so leave early.
And it makes sense. I mean, they've got to keep their shareholders happy. All right. Well, it's time for another ad break. And this is where I press the wrong button and hope that I press the right button. We here at Transport Evolved do believe in the freedom of information, freedom of the internet, and we detest the idea of paywalls, and we don't agree with the idea of locking away information in a special area for people who can afford to pay for it. As a consequence, you'll find that all of the stuff on Transport Evolved is free to access, and that means our shows are comparatively and completely funded by the in-stream advertising and on our sites, and funded by on-page ads, and of course your kind donations. But in order for Transport Evolved to be a growing, lively information hub for the ever-changing world of future car transport, it takes a lot of time and money to keep our site up and running. Here at the Transport Evolved studio, it takes on average 1 day a week to create the audio and video content that you enjoy in TEN and on our panel talk show. During the week, it takes 3 hours of dedicated full-time work. Sorry, hours and hours. It doesn't take 3 hours. It takes hours and hours of dedicated full-time work to bring you the content that you know and respect. So if you're a regular viewer or listener to Transport Evolved, we'd like you to consider taking out a monthly donation to help us pay the bills. And you can do so by going to www.transportevolved.com and clicking on the subscribe link in the right-hand rail. It really is that simple, and you can take out a 5, a 10, a 20 or a 40 pounds per month reoccurring payment, or you can take the option of a one-off payment. It really is that simple. And to those that do already make those donations, we do thank you for your continued support of the show. We're on to our final segment. Thank you for staying with us, gents. I know that we are running over. We are on the home stretch. Jim Motavalli from all host of interesting places, including Mother Nature Network, plugincars.com, for excellent books, and 2 more books that he's edited, I believe. Or is it 3 now, Jim?
I think it's a total of 8.
8 books in total. And Stevens of Cross Chasm. We're having a fantastic show. I'm really enjoying it, and I think the chat room is having fun. I'm looking at the monitor up there. They're all having fun. All right, Battle of Condos and Plug-in Owners. Now, this is an interesting story. It came across this one last week. There's been a long battle between landlords and of multi-family dwellings and condos and plug-in vehicle owners. In the state of California now, of course, it is mandatory if you're building a new multi-family dwelling that you have to include provision for plug-in vehicle owners. But there's still kind of this ongoing battle, people not being allowed to plug in, being asked to pay extortionate amounts of money. And the latest one comes from a woman in Detroit. In fact, the same city where the Volt is built. She has a Chevrolet Volt, and when she bought her Volt in June this year, she notified her homeowners association that she was going to be plugging in her Chevrolet Volt into her garage's 110 volt outlet. Now, she pays for her own electricity in her condo, but the garage, along with the rest of the garages in the development, are all fed by one communal power circuit. And she'd said at the time, look, I'm willing to pay for the electricity I've used to charge my car. She claims that she is being asked to pay a 300% markup. The cost of charging her car, she's saying, is $50 for the last few months. Her homeowners association is demanding that she pays $200 for charging her car. Now, there's always 2 sides to any story, and I've not seen any of the documented evidence, but I see no reason to doubt her claim. She's also sent a check for $50, which is the amount she says she owes to the Homeowners Association. They have not cashed the check. They've not even entered into a debate. They hung up 2 or 3 times on the local TV station when they rang up to find out what was going on, but eventually confirmed that the HOA had voted 4-1 in favour of cutting power to her garage. She now has to charge her Chevy Volt using a 100-foot extension cord, which she has to drape down stairs parking lot into her car. Now, this is getting old, isn't it, Matt?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's 100% ridiculous. It violates, and also in a lot of states and in provinces, it's illegal to have a markup on electricity of this type. So it's really frustrating, and in Canada it's extra frustrating because there's a few similar cases that we've had here, and in parts of Canada it's really common to have plugs for block heaters for engines, and so people are okay with that. And if you look at the energy, in some cases the block heaters are pulling more energy than the vehicle, but because it's a fuel, people really get upset about giving people free fuel. And it just doesn't add up. It's really frustrating.
And it's horrible, Jim, isn't it?
Well, if she's just across the river from Canada there in Detroit, she should probably run a long extension cord up there.
Well, that's the other thing. Obviously, Detroiters, they also have block heaters, don't they? I mean, they get pretty cold in the winter.
Well, I have this view about this kind of thing. I was just down in North Carolina for a speech, and they have some fairly regressive policies there. One of the ways EVs are getting charged fees is through highway usage. As we all know, electric vehicles do not use gasoline, therefore they don't pay gasoline taxes. And some legislatures have gotten upset. And in North Carolina, I think it's $150 a year they want to charge electric vehicle owners. I have two views about this. One is that it's a silly kind of thing to do at this stage of the industry when there's so few of them on the road. The amount of revenue you're going to get from that is paltry, and all you're doing is stifling the market, and you're going to end up getting less money, I think. But I also think eventually, because electric cars don't pay gas taxes and they use the highways, they will have to have some sort of payment in lieu of gas taxes. But to do it at this early stage is really crazy. And that homeowners association, the woman is not using $200 a month worth of electricity, and to cut her off just seems mean-spirited in the extreme.
I don't know whether it was a month or what the period was. I mean, she's been plugging in for a couple of months. But the interesting thing is she works as a researcher for a legal firm. So it's not like she's the kind of person who I think necessarily would want to try and get a free meal, but she also has legal help on her side, I guess, if she needs it. And the interesting thing here is that the fact that she told the HOA before she was going to do it, look, I'm going to do it. I'm willing to pay. So, and it's not even a communal garage. It's her garage. It's attached, she owns the house and the garage is part of that. It's just because the garage happens to be in a separate block, which the HOA fees
She's
pay
being
for.
penalized for being. They're basically penalizing her for being honest about it. She probably, if she hadn't said anything, then they wouldn't have even noticed that she was using a little more electricity, and she wouldn't be without power in her garage now.
No, exactly.
It's really a silly thing. I think they should realize the bad publicity's far going to outweigh any revenue stream they're going to get.
It's sad. It really is sad. Oh, it's nice. My border collie just let himself into my studio. I mean, he can't shut doors, but he can open them. And there's now a nice cool breeze coming through. So if I just sit here with a smile on my face for a second, it's because of the nice cold air in a very hot studio. Talking about, as we have done several times on the show today, the wonderful country of Norway, which has a population around the same size as the Greater Atlanta area. Just get your head around that for a second. The Greater Atlanta area in Georgia is about the same in terms of population as the entire Norway. Now, Norway has just passed 15% of all new cars it's selling being plug-in, which means that plug-in cars are definitely no longer niche market vehicles. And Autoblog Green did a fantastic comparison this week. They went, if you want to know how much of a market share 15% is, look at the US's most popular light-duty vehicle at the moment, and that's the Ford F-Series pickup. And it's year after year after year, the Ford F-Series pickups in their various guises account for about 5% of all new cars sold in any 1 month or any 1 year. 3 times that is what we're looking at in terms of plug-in vehicle sales in Norway. Now, obviously, Norway has a much lower population, so the actual numbers are much smaller. But the percentage of new car sales is 15%. Now, this is a very interesting thing because Norway now has nearly 50,000 plug-in vehicles on its roads, and that was Norway's intent when it's extremely generous incentives. You don't pay sales tax. In Norway, by the way, if you buy a big gas-guzzling SUV, you pay 100% sales tax. So you pay for the vehicle and then you pay the same again to tax it, or for your sales tax. You can drive in the bus lanes for free. You get free parking and free charging if you're in an electric vehicle. Norway did all of these things to try and kind of kickstart the electric car revolution. Norway, obviously, it's something like 97-98% of its energy comes from renewable sources, despite being a very large oil nation, European oil nation. But this scheme was originally designed to run until 2017. It looks like it might end next year because they've already reached their target. The questions I have for you both are, firstly, what can we learn from Norway and apply in our country, in our respective countries? And also, what do we think Norway's going to do? Is it going to stop the incentives? And if they do stop the incentives, does that mean people are going to go back to gasoline and diesel? Or do you think now that there are enough seeds sown that people will continue to plug in? Matt, what do you think?
Well, so Norway is a particularly prevalent example for me and for Canada, because Norway's number 9 on the oil exporter list, and we're number 10. So it's really interesting to see a very large oil exporter say, look, if we displace our local demand, that means we can sell more internationally and we can bring more international revenue into our country. So it's a message that at least us in the space in Canada really like to look to, because you can be a large oil exporter and be very EV friendly. And there's a good financial argument for it, which is really relevant for us.
So I'm waiting for Venezuela to really jump on the electric vehicle bandwagon.
Yeah, we'll have to see about that. But yeah, and in Canada, we're the only of the G8 nations that doesn't have a federal subsidy for EVs. And so, one of the challenges here is really focusing on how it aligns with our oil and gas policy. So that's why Norway is a good example for us.
Yeah.
The one thing I am worried, because the incentive is so strong that if they pull it, I feel like there's going to be a much larger hangover effect than would happen in the U.S. because the subsidy isn't quite as big. Like we lost our provincial subsidy in BC a couple of months back, and it definitely hurt numbers, but it didn't wipe out the industry. My only worry is that Norway has such large incentives that the moment they disappear, how bad will that hangover be?
Yeah. And Jim, I know that it's a challenge facing the whole of Europe, isn't it, at the moment? Because each country has different incentives and different challenges. Germany, for example, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have any incentives. And its plug-in industries, you go to Germany and they go plug-in what? Despite there being lots of plug-in fans in Germany. That's the impression I get anyway. I might be wrong.
Which is funny because they massively subsidize solar there.
Yeah.
Why not the other? One thing I would say about the Norwegian situation is it's one thing, and another thing it has in common with Canada, aside from producing oil, is that both countries have a very cold climate, and I don't think Norway is the most natural market for vehicles. Therefore, you could see a really big drop off because the subsidies make it so. If you were to say, shop the market given the current realities, you would see that a Tesla Model S is priced $30,000 less than a BMW M-Class car. And it's a fantastic vehicle, so why wouldn't you buy that instead of the BMW? If the Tesla is way more expensive than the BMW, the disincentive is there. And at some points, there's actually been months in Norway where the Model S was the best-selling car in the whole country. And the Nissan Leaf has been like that too. Yeah,
and it's worth noting as well that Tesla pushed the supercharger network all over Norway. There's a very famous YouTube blogger, Bjorn Nyland. Now he goes out and travels all over Norway in his Tesla Model S, and he takes couriers things to different places. But there is now a supercharger open this week in the Arctic Circle. It is right up there, right at the top of Norway. And, one of these years I want to drive up there sort of at this time of year and drive through the snow. But it just shows how much energy Tesla and other companies are putting into Norway. So I'm hoping that that there is some kind of sticking ability there. Let's not forget, Norway has not suddenly discovered electric vehicles. We had cars like the Kiewit L-Jet, the Kiewit Buddy, these other little kind of small scale EVs that Norwegians have driven for many, many, many years on small scales. Really hardened environmentalists, really hardened plug-in vehicle fans, and the the
Well,
encouragement.
you're forgetting the Think City.
Yeah, and the Think City, of course. Yeah.
Which is actually a Norwegian car,
Yeah.
a Norwegian company,
Yeah.
which was bought by Ford at one point, and they even opened a plant in the United States. Unfortunately, it did not prove successful, but Norway was up at in the vanguard of producing electric cars for at least a little while.
So, I guess what I'm saying is that these incentives, okay, they came along and made EVs more popular, but I think that there is that underlying inherent love of electric cars in Norway, certainly amongst now a large proportion of the population. And I genuinely think that once people have experienced electric cars, they're not going to go back. One of the interesting things I noticed here in the UK is there are an awful lot of British EV drivers, people who jumped on the bandwagon in the early days, they were early adopters, who are now trading in their first generation cars, and they're going for plug-in hybrids. They're going for range extended EVs. They're not going for pure electric cars. And I think that was a failure of automakers in the early days to set out some of the limitations and be honest about charging infrastructure and charging networks. And I encounter people who say, I'm just not willing to stop and wait at a rapid charger for half an hour, or I just don't trust that the rapid charger is going to be working. Now, from my point of view, I've been driving plug-in cars for more than 7 years now, and I've got to the point where I can look back and remember what things were like right back where, if you wanted to stop and charge, you had to stop at a pub for 6 hours and, plug in through the window. So for me, the charging networks we have now are fantastic, and there's no reason for me to go back to a plug-in hybrid or a plug-in car that has a petrol range extended engine. And I suspect in Norway, with the prevalence of the charging, with the ubiquity of charging and availability of these cars, they're going to be on the market secondhand. They're going to be around for a long time. I think there is a legacy, an intrinsic legacy that will continue the plug-in car market after they've stopped. I really hope so. All right, this week, Volkswagen it delivered its first e-Golf, US market e-Golf, to a gentleman in Oregon, Bruce Oberg, who was the winner of an online auction that we talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show. Now, interestingly, this is very telling, gents. There were two auctions happening pretty much at the same time, both for environmental causes. One was for an environmental charity that helps people deal with the after effects of climate change. That was the one that the Volkswagen Golf was auctioned off in proceeds of. The other one was a charity down in LA that was to do with environmental media, and that was connected to a Toyota fuel cell vehicle. Now, slightly different operation for both of them. The Volkswagen e-Golf was a straightforward online auction, highest bidder wins the car. The other one was a sweepstake. You put $100 down for a ticket, or you put $500 down for 6 tickets, and you could be given a chance to win the hydrogen fuel cell car when it comes to the US next year. Now, okay, that's a year's delayed gratification. The tickets were $100 as opposed to just bid how much you can afford. Interestingly, the Toyota fuel cell car had 148 tickets sold out of about 1,000 that had been allocated. Only 148 were sold, which means that effectively there was a massive loss made on that car somewhere because the cost of the car was never covered. And I suspect that obviously Toyota gave that car freely and has written that money off. But that demonstrates how little money. I mean, they must have raised, $14,000, $15,000 to give away a $70,000, $80,000 car, whereas the e-Golf went for $41,000, which is, 4,000 or 5,000 over its list price. Does this show us where the two technologies lie, Jim?
Yes, as I said before, there's such a small infrastructure for hydrogen, as well as, I would say, very low awareness of fuel cell cars. We're used to saying that people don't really understand but they're far less knowledgeable about hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells. And also for that fuel cell car, if they didn't live in LA, they wouldn't really be able to use it.
No, they wouldn't.
It's not surprising there wasn't a huge amount of interest in that. It's way premature to be selling that car anyway.
Yeah, and it was very interesting that Toyota said nothing about it. Nothing, other than we've done this, and they made a big song and dance about the sweepstake, and then nothing, really nothing.
It could have been. It could have been. There could be failures of promotion there.
Yes,
They
they
just
could be
didn't promote it enough.
It could
But
be.
there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't bid on a fuel cell car right now.
But this was a big. I mean, it was going to be a big prize announced at a big Hollywood A-list celebrity event. Big flop, I think, is all we can say on that one. All right, there's an and finally coming up. You have both seen the Tesla Model S P85D, I hope, and the various YouTube videos going around of people screaming like little girls, accelerating from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3.1 seconds. In fact, one of our chat room participants gave me a video. He was at the Tesla the Tesla D event, and he had a very fun time. Dennis, who I'm going to congratulate because he's just come to his first year of ownership of a Tesla Model S, and he's very happy with it. And he talks about how many miles he's done. I think he's done about 26,000 miles. So congratulations, Dennis. Well done. But he was also very surprised at the acceleration. That's quick, isn't it? It's nearly 1G, right? 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds is nearly 1G. Jim, have you experienced it yet?
I have not experienced it. I wrote a story about it, and I've seen all the press materials on it and everything. I think it's a very smart move on the part of Tesla, just tweaking their existing Model S and using the four-wheel drive technology from the Model X. Didn't cost them a whole lot, and it'll sell a few cars, especially if they're reaching the natural limit of how many people want the Model S. Makes a lot of sense to do that. I also think if you look at the Model S pricing in conjunction with, say, what average supercars cost, like McLarens or the Porsche, 918 or what that, it looks fairly reasonable. I mean, compared to a Ferrari or something like that. If they end up pricing this new Tesla at $120,000, say, that's not a huge amount in terms of the really expensive supercars out there, Lamborghinis, Porsches, Ferraris, Maseratis. So they're routinely priced way higher than that. So if the Tesla is actually faster than the Lamborghini equivalent, then it's a smart move on their part. People are going to want the fastest car. 3 seconds to 60 is pretty darn fast.
It is pretty darn fast, and Matt, I suspect you are of a similar opinion. Pretty fast.
Oh, it's amazingly quick. Yeah,
amazingly
but for me, I'm confused about the choice to blend together the ultra high performance track type acceleration and the autonomous driving concepts or the partial autonomy.
It's very interesting. I think it's going to be an exciting place moving forwards. But the reason why we're talking about the Model S P85D several weeks after the announcement is I found a car that's faster. Meet Grimsel. And Grimsel is a race car built by some students in Switzerland for the Formula Student Series. They're engineering students. And Grimsel has been Formula Student Series this season. It's won a couple of prizes, both on the track and also for its design and the autocross, etc., etc. Now, I'm going to give you the specs of this car first. It weighs 185 kilos, which is what? Two, maybe 3 people. It has 4 in-wheel motors, each obviously driving a wheel. Those motors are 37 kilowatts. It's a single-seat race car. It's purpose-built, carbon fiber. The students built the car themselves using the carbon. They molded it all themselves. Stupidly light car, and it's just set a new record. 0 to 62 miles an hour, so 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. Wait for it. I'm going to show you the video first. So those who are watching can watch this at home. This is the car. It's starting. Now it's at 60. That's 1.785 seconds. 0 to 60
yeah, but
in 1.785.
Is it going to pass federal crash testing?
No. But I tell you what.
No.
That is fantastic, and it's also. I mean, I wrote when I wrote it. I wrote this as if this is the electric car that can beat a Formula One race car, and that makes people sit up and take notice from an acceleration point of view, because Tesla has done a fantastic it's done a fantastic thing with the Model S P85D, and it's 3.1 seconds to 0 to 60, and that is phenomenal. Fastest production sedan on the market, fastest production electric car on the market. But little Grimsel, it just makes me smile. It's just one of those cars that makes me go, oh, that's so quick. And you know what? I would love to see it. I don't know if it could take on Pikes Peak. I don't think it would have a big enough battery pack. But I would love to see that little sucker take on Pikes Peak next year. And obviously, electric cars are quite popular at Pikes Peak now, aren't they, Jim?
Oh, yeah. Definitely are. And there's a lot of series where they make a lot of sense. For instance, in drag racing, the fact that electric vehicles have 100% torque from 0 RPM makes them great for the quarter mile, and you don't have to worry about the battery pack running out of juice because it's such a short stint they're doing. And there's a guy named John Wayland out in California. Yes. He races a Datsun 210.
Yes.
And he takes that up against muscle cars, and they laugh at him. And
Oregon.
He blows the doors off of them. Yeah, he's from Portland.
Yeah, Oregon.
Where you're going to be moving, right?
Yep, that's the one. It's one of the reasons. Want to see the EV drag racing scene up there. So anyway, if someone says to you electric cars are slow, you can show them the Tesla Model S P85D, and if they still don't think that's fast enough, just show them Grimsel. I'd sit behind the wheel of that thing. I'm sure it feels like a rocket taking off. That's for today's show. Thank you very much, gents, for joining us. I know this is a long show, 1 hour and 40 minutes, I reckon, by my reckoning. Thank you very much for joining us, Jim. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, I have a website at jimmotavalli.com. It's all one word, Jim, Motavalli. You can get in touch with my stuff there. And I'm regularly on Car Talk, which is cartalk.com, Mother Nature Network, which is mnn.com, and nytimes.com, the New York Times site. So all those places you can find me regularly.
Fantastic. And Matt, what about you?
Crossgasm.com or fleetkarma.com, but Fleet Karma with a C, not a K, or mykarma.com. And I wanted to wish you a happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that was I've forgotten when that was now. It was a weird one this year because I had my cybernetic implant fitted just before my birthday, so it was all a bit weird. But yes, it's healing. I just have a scar now, which is good. Hopefully they'll figure out what was going on. And apologies again to people for last week not being a live show. But, we're back. We're back to normal. You can find us on iTunes. You can find us on YouTube. You can on any of the decent podcast providers. And, of course, you can also find us here every week. www.transportevolved.com. You follow the link there to live. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. And as always, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.